I'm Ann Powers, critic and correspondent for NPR Music. Welcome to our keynote conversation for Fluxed, Making Popular Music in the Midst of Change and Transition. This keynote is brought to you by the Pop Conference, the annual music writing and pop music studies gathering. This year, the Pop Conference is presenting a special virtual version of its annual gathering called Turn and Face the Change, a pop convergence on music and flux. It's hosted by New York University's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, produced by Oliver Wang, Jason King, and RJ Smith. This year's Pop Conference couldn't have happened without our sponsor, Critical Minded, an initiative to invest in cultural critics of color, co-founded by the Nathan Cummings Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Go to popconference.org to register and learn more about the many fantastic panels, roundtables, mentorship sessions, and much more happening over the next 3 days. So we are gathered together here with just the perfect mix, I think, of artists, music makers, creative people to talk about change, flux, transition, whatever word you want to throw in there. Really, this conversation, to say a conference or a conversation is about change is to say it's about life itself. That's how broad the subject is. But each of our featured artists today, I think, really embodies openness to change and also willingness to confront what change means in individual lives, for the planet, for music making. We have gathered together Devante Hynes. Devante Hynes is a producer, multi-instrumentalist, composer, songwriter, and vocalist. Raised in England, he started in the punk band Test Icicles before releasing two orchestral acoustic pop records as Lightspeed Champion. Since 2011, Dev has released 4 solo albums under the name Blood Orange: Coastal Grooves, Cupid Deluxe, Freetown Sound, and Negro Swan, all of which have been critically acclaimed, as well as 2019's Angel's Pulse mixtape. Dev has become well known for his often surprising songwriting and producing collaborations with many different artists: Sky Ferreira, Solange Knowles, Carolyn Polacek, Clams Casino. I could go on and on and on. Philip Glass, Charlotte Gainsbourg. More recently, Dev has also emerged as an in-demand movie composer. His soundtracks include Giacopolis, Palo Alto, and Mainstream, and Melina Matsoukas and Lena Waithe's Queen and Slim, and Passing, directed by Rebecca Hall, set for release this year. We also have Tamara Lindemann. Tamara Lindemann is a Canadian singer-songwriter, producer, and actor who performs as the Weather Station. Emerging out of Toronto's vibrant folk scene, Lindemann released her debut East EP in 2008, followed by the LP The Line in 2009, expanding on her earthy lyrical style, distinctive finger-picked guitar and banjo parts. She released the critically acclaimed follow-up All of It Was Mine in 2011 and earned a SOCAN Songwriting Prize nomination in 2013. In 2015, she released her third LP, Loyalty. In 2017, she delivered an eponymously titled LP. Tamara's latest album, Ignorance, and certainly one of the albums of the year, I feel safe to say, even though we're not halfway through the year, released on Fat Possum Records, is sensuous, ravishing, as hi-fi a record as Lindemann has ever made, breaking into pure pop at moments, at others a dense wilderness of notes. And it deals with some of the most pressing subjects of our time in an astonishingly intimate way. We also have Róisín Murphy, let me say the legend, the legend Róisín Murphy. After groundbreaking early work with trip-hop duo Moloko, and after several acclaimed solo albums and a Mercury Prize nomination, Irish singer-songwriter, producer, performance artist, conceptual artist Róisín Murphy's ascent can be framed as a classic Alice in Wonderland story. Curious, cool beyond her years, teenager enters the warehouses, clubs, and gritty side streets of northern England, falls in with a producer at a party, forms a band, and snags a multi-album record deal, burns up the charts and wins award nominations, becomes a mainstay of the art world, receives obsessive attention for her unique fashion sense, tours the globe several times over, goes solo, and further consolidates her status as an ever-evolving, constantly surprising, proper pop star, and comes to represent the outsider spirit of an entire generation. Her latest release, Róisín Murphy, is her next chapter, a seamlessly edited 10 years in the making collection of tracks, produced in collaboration with her Sheffield pal, DJ Parrott, and once her most unabashedly dance floor ready yet deeply autobiographical work to date. And there is a new album as well that is a remix version of Róisín Murphy, which we're going to talk about today, called A Simulation. And finally, we have Rostam. Rostam is a multiple Grammy-nominated musician, singer, songwriter, and composer, and an acclaimed pop and indie rock producer. Born to Iranian parents in Washington, D.C., reared. Rostam also works as a solo artist. He's released a critically acclaimed album, 2017's Half Light, and later this year, we will have Changeophobia, really the perfect album for our conversation today to talk about. And Rostam has been releasing songs one by one from that album, and it will all be available in June. In addition to being a member of the electro soul group Discovery, Rostam was a founding member of Vampire Weekend. He joined Vampire Weekend in 2006 and played guitar, keyboard, and sang in the band, while also acting as a lyricist and songwriter. Rostam produced Vampire Weekend's self-titled debut album, and he also produced the band's follow-up album, Contra. In 2013, he also co-produced Modern Vampires of the City. He's also written and produced a diverse array of artists, including Kid Cudi, Ra Ra Riot, The Walkmen, Charlie XCX, Ty Dolla $ign, Carly Rae Jepsen, who Dev has also worked with, Maggie Rogers, Declan McKenna, and Hynes. And he's composed original music for Broadway, film, and television. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. I want to start with a big question that hopefully we can take to a personal place. The theme of this year's pop conference is change or flux. As I said before, an element of existence that's so pervasive that, you know, we could say we're gathered here to talk about life itself. But in music, change or changes has specific meaning. The changes in jazz means, you know, the harmonic basis over which music is improvised. Tonal flux can mean the microtonal shifts in a voice, in a synthesizer, in the bend of a guitar. And this makes me want to ask about your musical practice and what you think of when you think of change or changes in your musical practice. What's the first thing that comes to mind? I'm going to throw that to you, Dev.
I guess I don't know, you know, if I'm honest, I don't really think about change in regards to myself. Yeah, I think just me personally, I rely on a natural change from learning. So kind of like whatever I'm taking in, or whatever journey I'm on personally, or even I guess somewhere intentionally. I feel like whatever that path is through me will just naturally do it, rather than just kind of sitting and thinking like, okay, I'm going to change. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's, I'm only ever really able to see it once I look back.
In your writing process or in your creation process, I don't even know if you would talk about what you do as like a form of writing. Actually, that's my first question. Is it a form of writing, or would you use another kind of metaphor or way of talking about your practice of composition itself, of how you make music?
It kind of varies. I mean, I guess it's yeah, you can call it writing or form of practice. I mean, it's really if it's more scoring work, then it's very it's, I don't know, it's such a different part of my brain. and it's not to say it's not personal, but it's I'm not like working through things. You know, if I'm like making music by myself, and even if there's a more aesthetic idea I'm trying to do, it's still a form of just working through some kind of personal thing, because it's so super intertwined. Yeah.
I want to bring up the specific title, Rostam, of your new record, Changeophobia, because change phobia. Thanks for that. Thanks for naming it that, because it's so appropriate to our discussion today. And I wanted to read a quote that you of yours about the title track, Change Phobia. You told a journalist, transphobia, biphobia, homophobia, these words hold a weight of threat. And it occurred to me that the threats they bear, the fears they described, are rooted in a fear of change, a fear of the unknown, of a future that is not yet familiar, one in which there's a change of traditions, definitions, and distributions of power. So that is a kind of a political analysis. I wonder how your political analysis of the fear of change intersects with your personal process in writing this music, because the song Change Phobia, you know, it's a first person song. It's about your own kind of processing your fears and your desire to change. So talk about the intersection of the personal and political at the site of change.
Well, I think the intersection of the personal and political is like what I'm all about. I think when people who make music say their music is not political, or, you know, they're apolitical, I think that that's really bullshit. And I think all music is political, and you can choose to want to contextualize your music as not political, but I actually think that's like revealing your privilege. If you say your music is not political, what you're actually saying is that you've never had to fight against, you know, injustice. So I do believe all music is political, and for me, I guess I sort of I realize, like, I think having parents who survived a revolution in Iran and came to America, and me being born in America and experiencing, you know, a life where I think my parents were so interested in the sort of safety of the American experience on some level, or stability in relation to what they had experienced in Iran, that I think on some level, this idea of change, it was something that I wasn't taught to embrace. And I think maybe because my parents experienced so much change. And so I had a realization, like, in the last 5 years, that you know, that there's something powerful about being conscious of our own fear of change. And I think it is a fear that everyone has to different degrees. And for me, just being conscious of that. So it's interesting when you said this idea of changes in jazz, because jazz is something that I've become increasingly more interested in integrating in my own work. And part of that is, you know, like, not relying on the same chord progressions. So maybe I'm a little bit more conscious about it. I agree totally with what Dev said about letting sort of like constantly learning more about music, like letting that sort of guide you. And that is a guiding principle for me. But I'm also sometimes like self-aware, and I want to tell myself, like, you need to try to write a song with a chord progression that you've never used before. You need to use some chords that you've never used before. And that, even just that sort of like prompt for myself, is, I feel like, an inspiring and a good way to make change.
I love that. I think sometimes the saxophone seems to be the voice of change, or the seductive invitation to change in your songs. Sometimes I don't know if different instruments signify like a turn. I wonder if that's true for any of you. Like, would a particular instrument signify a turn or a change, or like, you know, signal something in your music that this is a signal of transformation, if that ever happened, or if there's an example of that?
When I think about change in music, when I read the question, the thing that I immediately thought of is I just thought about empathy, and how music to me, I've been increasingly been thinking about the transformative power of music could be in empathy and in companionship, and I think about all the music through history that I think music has always been transformational and has always been so rebellious in so many ways. And what I think about, if I think about music and changes I want to see, I think about how music is where we see into each other's minds and hearts, and if as musicians we understand that power of like, I'm telling you something, and because I put it to a melody, you'll take it in, and perhaps you'll understand it in a way that you wouldn't if I just spoke it. So I think about, that's what I think about. I think less about instruments and more about words and meaning.
Well, Tamara, I'm glad that you said that, because your new album so profoundly blends the sort of the incomprehensible approaching. You try to approach the incomprehensible climate crisis. It's a classic case of something that we as humans aren't, we can't understand it. It's so vast. And yet you chose to do it through these personal narratives. So and often kind of aligning themes of maybe heartbreak or individual personal change with this, like the glaciers moving. And I wondered, it's very artful. And I wondered how you came to that process in your songwriting.
I mean, a bit by accident, but I think what I was thinking about, if I was to give myself credit, I would think of like, I think the reason why this record has caught on and touched a nerve is because I think people desire permission to understand their own feelings. I think of times in my life when I've heard something in a song and it's made me understand that's what I feel, and I think that what I was trying to do was I was trying to give voice to some like emotional experiences that I hadn't heard very much in songs, that to me felt like they were just like in the collective experience. And I would write the song about a personal feeling, and then it would start to feel like I wasn't sure if I was writing about my life or like my politics or my friend. And I realized, that ferment is where things get exciting for me. And I thought, and this is something I'm thinking of more now, of like for the future, of like how, if I do my job as a writer, can I allow a listener into an experience that they have in themselves that they haven't named or noticed?
Yeah, I wonder if any of you have had that similar sort of melding, that moment that you describe of, I'm not sure what's motivating me. I don't know. I think of you, Devin, you're saying, it just organically flows out. Does songwriting take you to a place sometimes where that those unspoken connections among different kinds of emotions, or even like what in your life is inspiring you might not know? Have you had that experience, I wonder?
Can I say I have, and that songwriting is a very Freudian kind of experience for me. Well, I write songs in lots of different ways, but many times I write songs just putting words and ideas that I've collected, because I'm kind of quite curious person. So, and as you said in my intro, it's perfect. I'm a curious person, and I'm always looking for things and always collecting ideas and collecting words and phrases and stuff. And sometimes I'll write and I'll just throw things together that I've got in a dossier here, And that can sometimes turn out to be the most Freudian thing of all. It can really explain so much about things to me, about me, But going back to the original question, change for me is connected to collaboration. So I sort of remain the same, but whoever I collaborate with, it takes me to another sort of dimension or another place, and a place of change. And the other thing I wanted to say, the thing about music and companionship, Tamara, is beautiful thing to say. And I think it's so relevant to the moment, to the year that we've just lived through, that all the stories that I'm hearing from people that music, has saved them or whatever, it's like inverted commas, your music has saved me or music has saved me. I think it comes down to that. It comes down to music can be a companion, and there's nothing more beautiful than to realize that even at this late stage in my career. I've made lots and lots of music, but to really feel like actually my music has journeyed with people through this year. Music itself has journeyed with people throughout this bloody awful year, and in that sense, even though there's no money in touring and there's no way of making a living if you're signed to a major label, etc., in that sense, making music is kind of the best thing in the world to be doing this year. It's just incredible because it really means so much to people.
Well, I'm glad you jumped in, and Róisín, you read my mind, because my question for you is about collaboration. But I'm going to set that aside because I want to continue on this thought about music as companionship. Róisín Machine was a record that I know I personally danced to in my kitchen. Many people I know did, and I know my colleagues at NPR Music and we would often discuss, like, we each had it became known as like sad disco, but it wasn't sad. It was the solitary disco, the solitary dance experience. And I'm just thinking about how dance music has always been this incredible organism for transformation and for connection and community, and for like that night on the dance floor where you go into the club, and by the end of the club you feel like you're a different person in some way. Maybe you're with a different person, maybe you've had a new relationship with your body through this experience, and that happens with every kind of music and every kind of live setting. But releasing music in a time, or knowing your music is out there in a time when listeners are often solitary, how does that change your attitude or your feelings about the music that you've made?
Well, it has felt pretty miraculous, that the thing has resonated in such a year, But having said that, the album itself was made as an album, very much so, it was made it's all segued and it's one thing. So it's not for the clubs, it is for home listening. So yeah, I guess, but all of music surely has had this very special place. I've done these several listening parties that they're doing, this guy's doing here in the UK on Twitter.
Yes.
And everybody puts the album on and everybody listens at the same time, and the artist is there and explaining what happened at the same time as the music in real time is being played at home in all these thousands of homes, and it's been wonderful, And I think that's not just dance music, that can make that connection, can make people feel connected, can make people feel that companionship, which is such a beautiful word for it, I think.
Yes, Tim from the Chameleons, his Twitter listening parties have been quite a sensation. And I wonder if any of the rest of you have had that kind of experience too, of like a virtual communal connection with your audience, we have Versus, we have DJ Nice out there, we have these virtual experiences coming together, and how that's felt to you over the past year. I throw that out to anyone in the group. Any good experiences with fans this year?
I would just say, I made a stream thing as well, which really was the biggest thing that I've ever made visually. It was a big deal to make a whole gig as a stream, and very, very hard work, but it was really rewarding, and I think it meant an awful lot to my fans. It doesn't replace the real thing at all, It's a different thing. But it's interesting. But it's kind of also weird to see so many DJs, standing there on a Zoom link or whatever, DJing. It does sometimes feel depressing, actually, that. And so that's all I want to say.
I mean, I would jump in and say conversely, like I feel like I've appreciated the pandemic for pointing out to us, I feel like there are ways in which the music industry is always behind, and if you think of the 20th century as being, music was a gathering tool, and it still is. Like, it's like you come together, you see music occurring, but for millennials and Gen Z, I mean, music is on headphones a lot of the time, and I think of music as a private experience. That's what it is to me. It's what I listen to when I'm walking alone, when I'm going to sleep, it's a private experience. And I think that the pandemic has kind of allowed the privacy of music to come again to the fore, and to point out that, like, actually for a lot of people, recorded music is really important, and it is a one-to-one relationship of singer and listener. And I feel like we got turned around with the market, financial imperative being on touring, and we've forgotten that, for a lot of people, what it originally is headphones. It's one-on-one connection.
And how does making music that people are going to experience on headphones, I'm curious how that affects production. Like, what does it, I don't know, I'm thinking, Rostam, like, both you and Dev, I was listening to playlists of yours, and like and I could say this of any of you really, there are so many little elements in each song that represent, maybe different moments in history. They evoke other artists, or they, sonic surprises. Each song is a world. It's a cliche to say that artists are world builders in this time of great interest in world building and sci-fi dystopias and all that. But really, this group we have here today, you each are world builders. So I wonder if you think about production differently in terms of when it's going to be in headphones. And then, Dev, when you're producing or we're composing for a movie, that's changed too. Once it was all of us together in a theater. Now it's me on my couch, you on yours. So how does it affect the sonic mix?
I will say this though, every Blood Orange record is only made for headphones. I've only ever made it for headphones from the beginning. So I'm kind of lucky, I guess. That hasn't changed for me. It's only made for headphones because it's how I personally have always connected with music from when I was younger to now. So it's always kind of like I mainly mix it on headphones, on different types of headphones. I'll play it back on speakers, and I will listen back on that. But in my mind, it's made for like, walking around or transport and listening to stuff on headphones. But yeah, in terms of scoring and stuff, honestly, I haven't thought about it. I really haven't let it change anything. I don't know. I agree with what Tamara said. It's interesting, like how tied, I guess, to the financial everything is, and we all took hits this year. Some people took more hits than others, but it is so important. Like, I had a lot of friends that were releasing music during the year, or had things planned in terms of releasing music during the year, who were feeling like they didn't want to release it and felt weird about it. But I always tried to speak to them and tell them that no one stopped wanting music. Like, we still want music. We want it more. I consumed the most media I've consumed in my life within the last year. So I think if there's a spark within all the darkness, I think it's a connection, and maybe going back to a root of, I guess, of being able to enjoy things that are made by people without the, I don't know, without the idea that it's, without things being taken for granted, without like the idea of competition within it, or all these like weird, awful things that get tied up within music or books and art and whatever. I think whether people are aware of it or not, it's kind of slowly come back to this idea of enjoyment, I guess.
I love that, because I too have consumed more media than ever before in a life dominated by the consumption of media. I mean, I'm a critic, right? So, but I was just reflecting yesterday about, I think I've gone back to the novel and like read or audiobooked more novels than I ever have before. And sometimes I do feel like there's so many stories pinging around in my head at once. So there is a kind of new attentiveness, but then there is also this idea, this perhaps myth, that people are so distracted now and can't absorb anything. I think each of you, your music, Róisín, you rightly pointed out that your last album is an album experience, and it really is. I see it as a journey to the heart of a self, of a character, and you're expecting that from your audience. How do you present these works that you want your audience, your listeners, your
Well,
fans?
we didn't let go of the club by any means. And where we've come from, myself and Parrot, we definitely have come from a club scene.
Yeah.
That's where we know each other. I've known him since I was a teenager, and the beautiful thing about the kind of symmetry between the club experience and the way production went to go along with it is it wasn't like the sort of rock and roll egotistical, here is the album, here is my statement, end of story, like it or not. It's like, well, we can repurpose this and we can change this and we can put this on a different system. Suddenly it can be on a headphones, and then we slightly change it, and then it's on a big system, and then we slightly change it and it's in a fancy disco, and then we slightly change it and it's in a disgusting dirty cellar. And and there's this sort of lack of macho kind of rock and roll ego in dance music that actually really attracts me. Um, and has always attracted me. And there's always been a kind of blasé radicalism about it as well. A kind of like, we'll just try this new technology, We'll just see what this desk can do. We'll just see what we can get out of this studio. We'll just throw Bananarama at it, or Depeche Mode, or or anything, anything, and we'll see what happens, and it will, because we just want to see if it'll make people dance. And out of that, you get this sort of not very sort of showy offy experimentalism, This not deeply sort of pretentious or intellectualized, but truly experimental kind of mentality. And that's always fascinated me. And I'd hate to see a world without it, And that's before you even start to talk about the level of connection that you can feel when the right record is dropped at the right time in a club with the right crowd, and we're not all just standing there taking pictures of the DJ. Obviously, that's annoying. But, that's where this record's come from. But the album part of it's an album. There's so much an album, and it is for at home. Yeah, what was the original question? Sorry.
Well, I mean, you lead me to want to ask you about. I love this scenario you're laying out, where the music is tweaked and changed for different spaces, and reimagining it in the hands. And that leads me to what I did want to ask you before, which is when you're working with different DJs or producers, is there any point of fear, like they're going to change your work, your baby, They're going to make it into a mutant,
Yeah.
a new mutant. But is that, and that must be exciting, but is there fear as well? Is there like,
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I'm all about, my biggest decision is who I decide to work with. And I know that I've made the decisions based on something in my soul. I really do. And so I have to go with it once I've made the decision. But sometimes they really, push me in places that I wasn't expecting to be. Some producers that I work with, can really unravel songs that I've spent, days and weeks on. And it can be scary. It can be really frightening. But that is what's leading me to have change in my career. And it's leading me to learn and develop. And I ultimately know, I'm the type of artist who, as I said, I do all the visual, I do all the creative direction. I make the decisions about who I'm working with the music too. But once I've done that, I'm really in their hands. I'm really like, honestly, I have to let go and relinquish power, Róisín, and let these people who I've decided to work with do what they do.
well, I saw both Dev and Rostam nodding enthusiastically when you were talking about this. And Rostam, I want to ask you, as someone who is an artist and a producer, an artist, producer, a producer of yourself, a producer of bands you've been in, a producer of people who you're not technically parts of the band, like how do you move through those different roles and what do you carry into each different situation?
I think I feel very responsible for wanting to help whatever artist I'm working with realize a vision. And if that means starting songs, it's often that like half the songs on an album that I'll produce, we start from scratch in the studio. And if that means finishing songs, I love helping people finish their songs. And I may help with the writing, or I may not help with the writing at all. And to me, all those different kind of energies and levels of collaboration are fun. And in a similar way, like making records on my own and making records with other people, they're both super fulfilling to me. And I want to keep doing that for the rest of my life. Like that makes me so happy. So at the same time, like it is like Dev was saying, it's like kind of like a different part of your brain maybe. And like, you're sort of like, I also connect with what Róisín said about the songwriting being Freudian. And I think that when you're writing songs, like you sometimes don't know what they're about until even after they come out. And then you're like, oh, this is what I was trying to tell myself something. And this song was how I was trying to tell myself this thing. And yeah, so like, I guess to answer your question, I think fundamentally what a producer does, whether you're producing your own work or working on another person's project, I really think it's about caring.
Caring, being open, being connected. Where does like conflict come in? I love the wide smile and the like, it's about caring and connection. But I want to hear about, there must be conflict sometime in the production process.
Conflict for me comes in when I have a feeling like that I have to be, this is in my life too. Now we're going to get Freudian. But, when I know deep down that there needs to be a conflict, and that's when conflict comes. And that's just as simple as that. But hopefully there isn't an awful lot of that. And of course, it's better if the less of it there is, the quicker the record's going to develop,
Rostam, did you want to add something?
I mean, I think if you really believe something as a producer and the artist you're working with does not agree, the most power you have is to make that version of the song and send it to them and wait. And they may love it, they may hate it, but ultimately it's the artist is always in control. And I think that's the most power you have. And often it does work. I have to say, that's a secret. It does work. And if you never bring it up again, you know, a year from now, the artist might say, oh, I really love that. I love how loud that one thing is. And, you know, you ignore the fact that they asked you to turn it down 50 times. But ultimately it is in service of the artist. And that's what I like that. I like that you have that one power to make that version and send that version. But if they don't like it, they don't like it. And that's, to me, that's like sort of the end of the conflict. And as someone who makes records with other people and on my own, like I can never feel hurt about it, because ultimately if I want to make a record with an incredibly loud wood block, I can do that. So I don't feel emotional.
Well, what about in your own work? Like, have you had that sort of conflict with yourself ever? Have any of you had the situation where you made something and it felt precious to you, and yet something about it was not quite, something still was unfinished, and then maybe you surprised yourself? Tell me about a time you surprised yourself with a change you made in something you were working on, and it was completely different than what you thought it would be. And almost sometimes I always wonder if there's resistance to that. I know as a writer, I sometimes have resistance. Oh, I love this, but then, oh man, if I try this other thing, and it opens something up. So I'm curious about that kind of inner conflict and process and the inner drama that you're working with. I'm seeing you smile, Deb. Do you have anything like that? Have you ever dealt with that?
I mean, it's pretty much the entire writing process for me is just conflict within myself. But you know, I'm very it's weird. Like when I do my own records, I guess I always say to myself that a Blood Orange record, the only thing that I think makes it Blood Orange is if I start it and if I finish it. And then whatever happens in the middle is whatever happens in the middle. So if that's me playing something for someone and they have ideas and we try out all those ideas, and so in that way, I never particularly feel that that like locked off or anything, because if I'm working on something and I feel a little stuck or whatever, you know, I can play it to someone who I trust, and you know, I'm certain actually that they will have an idea that my brain could never have got to. Whether we end up using it or not, it's even that is inspiring and unlocks something. I just love the idea of how other people think, and they're not always musicians. You know, my thing is that if I'm friends with someone, if I like someone, it means I respect them and it means that I trust them. So I will listen to any idea and try it out. So that's kind of how I get around it in regards to myself. Like if I feel a little like stuck or whatever, then I just kind of like open the floor, I guess. And I don't really release anything unless I'm absolutely 100% on it. I can't put something out into the world if there's like a 2% in the back of my head nibbling away, because it will then erode till the end of time. So I have to be absolutely 100 on it.
That's interesting to me, because I think what you achieved through that perfectionism is a kind of a you used the word organic earlier, but there's an organic quality to Blood Orange music that I feel like I'm inside inside your head, or you're inside my head. It's a very thought process kind of experience listening to your music, as opposed to like a narrative, you're telling me a story or instructing me to get on the dance floor or whatever. It's like it feels very intuitive. Róisín brought up Freud and these kind of things that surface. And I feel that each of you in your own way honor the process of things surfacing, the process of surfacing. If you know what I don't know, does that make any sense? Does that resonate with anybody? Like, I don't know. I think that happens when I listen to each of your music, something new will surface every time I listen. So.
Well, I mean, what Devante was saying and what you're saying makes me think of, I've had the experience a couple times of being like a mentor for a singer-songwriter residency. So I see all these young writers, and I'm just utterly struck because it's always the same thing where it's like music often like surfaces taboos. Like there's something really powerful about like songwriting. It brings up the one thing you don't know how to say. It brings up the one thing you're ignoring or trying to put aside. And what I find, like when I think of conflict in music, is like all these young writers I've worked with, and I am the same as them, but just like it's the part of the song that they're uncomfortable with is always the part that's like an ugly truth that they don't want to say, or there's like a lie, like they've put a lie in the song. And it's interesting because sometimes when you watch someone play, like you can tell, like you're like, that's the lie, like scrape it aside. But to me, like making a record is like in ways like pure joy, but also pure conflict, because you're always breaking something. And if you're not, it's not going to be good. Like you have to break some rule, you have to get something like ugly. And I just find it so interesting. I'm like, is all art like that, or is it just music? And yeah, there's so much there. The taboo is, I think, like good music dances around the taboo in beautiful ways, is my opinion.
It's a good question. Is all art like that? I was watching the movie The Painter and the Thief the other day, that documentary. I don't know if any of you have watched it. And I was intrigued by her process as a painter, and the process of painting where, I think that happens in painting, where the very idea of what the image will be changes every time you return to the canvas, and it feels high stakes, but then it's always fragments. It's Deb, what you were saying about it's fragments until that moment that it is so not a fragment, and that's when I can release it. But have any of you ever released something you felt was maybe not quite finished and you living with it? Has that ever happened?
I just want to jump on real quick, because as much as I said that it's I guess it's like a continuation, because even if it's 100 in my mind, I could change everything if I had the second chance. Like I feel like it's a weird battle, and it's somewhat, I don't know if other people feel that way. It's hard to explain. It's like I'm completely 100 with it and I can let it go into the world, but I'm also, I don't know, crazy enough that like if I did it again, I'd just probably change like everything. So
a little Taylor Swift envy in the room, maybe. She's redoing all of her songs now.
Oh, she's so smart, my God, to do that. But yeah, I think that you can never be fully 100%, but I also think that being an artist, I'm even sort of a bit shy to say that, but being an artist, big part of it is actually putting the stuff in the world, having the bravery to put it in the world, because we could all sit around and say it's not finished forever and ever and ever and ever. And actually part of my job is to be the catalyst with the producers that I work with and say it's done, because when they're fiddling and stuff, they're fiddlers more than I am. I'm a kind of big picture thinker, and part of my job is to go, okay, look, we're aiming at finishing this, and it will have to go out in the world at some point, and you've got to be brave, and that's separates the men from the boys, as we say.
Well, another thought that occurs when Tamara mentions how does it work in other art forms is the visual, and how the visual can also, you know, change and flux and personal transformation happens through the visual. And Róisín, I wanted to address this first to you because you really have presented so many iconic videos, imagery over the years, and played with your own image. And I wondered about those evolutions, and like you are a person, a human, a body, and yet you are constantly transforming through your visual self-presentation. So how does that factor into your work as an artist?
It's probably not even necessary, you know. But it's something that
well, we're thankful. We're grateful though, because you've given us a lot with those works.
I've enjoyed it since I was a child, and you know, I've always been an exhibitionist, and it's a misunderstood word. It's seen as a very egotistical thing to be an exhibitionist, but an exhibitionist purely is someone who puts on an exhibition, and the art form is making it, and the joy is making it. You know, it's sort of taken for granted by me that people will look at it, you know, but that's not what it's about. It's about making it. And I love visual things. I've got a very visual mind. I love faces. I love what faces can do. I love what my face can do and how it can draw you in. And it fascinates me, and it has led me into a real fascination with filmmaking. And it's well known that anybody who's into me knows that I'm really into Cindy Sherman, and that I sort of saw that when I was 14 and found it incredibly liberating, you know, to see, because I was becoming awakened to sort of feminism and ideas and music and culture and all these things, but I was still this exhibitionist inside. And somehow before I saw Cindy's work, there was a dissonance between that and this I want to use me to exhibit all sorts of taboos, like going back to what we were talking about, you know, art. It's kind of taboo in a sense, and unless you're a puppet, or you know, you're seen as a kind of, do you understand what I mean? Like, it's,
yes,
feminism at the time was very brown and grey and like no makeup and no fun, you know, to me. And that's fine, you know, if that's the way you want to present yourself and that's what you're comfortable with, that's lovely. But also it's fine if you're just find joy in the complete opposite. And that's just who I've been.
Well, and Cindy Sherman, of course, you know, transforming her body in, you know, taking on roles or characters in her photographs, but even using prosthetics, like transforming her body, which also makes me think about like what happens with the voice in music, and how, you know, you can transform your voice using effects, or I don't know, your new, like listening to the song, the new remix of a simulation. And I was reading, you know, you're like, well, I had to give a little bit of myself over and be, you know, you were transformed by your collaborator. Your voice is transformed.
The collaborator that I'm working with now, it's even worse. It's like, it's, you know, I'm going through, but you know, and he's not happy until he's happy, and that sort of disregards sometimes me completely. But I'm going with it, and it's amazing what's happening. The results are just incredible. But there's, you know, sometimes it's very awkward to get through certain stages of transformation. Yeah, the visual, I do it because I love it, and sometimes I felt it actually has gotten in the way of people really understanding the music and understanding that I really care about the music, you know. So
isn't that funny though, that it never got in the way of people understanding that David Bowie cared about music when he wore costume?
no, but you know, God be with the days. God be with the days, because where is even a male David Bowie now? You know, it's funny. It's funny, you know, to think about that.
But this is great because it's leading into another topic I wanted to discuss, which was persona. One of the really fascinating developments, you know, I'm old enough to have like come of age in the era, especially in indie rock or punk rock, which I loved as a kid, of the band. You know, the band was the thing. Several of you have been, maybe all of you have been in bands, or started out in bands, but now you each choose to record either under your own name, or in the case of Dev and Tamara, recording under names that are band names, but they're not band names. They're alter egos. Or so I wondered about how you're, and especially, of course, this came from thinking about you, Dev. When I first started listening to you as Lightspeed Champion many years ago and loving that music, and then you've evolved and you became something else and something else, and just what is happening in the process of changing your persona, changing your names? Just tell me a little bit about that process. And as an individual, why even take on a name that isn't your given name?
Well, if I think back, it was back then, it was more the idea of wanting to somewhat avoid connotations. I was really aware when I was younger, and I have like a slightly different view of this now, but when I was younger, I didn't like the idea that, in knowing that and how much stuff I liked and how vast my taste was, I didn't like the idea that essentially if I like came out using my name, the first thing I do, then everyone will think that was like the quote unquote real me, where there is no real me. All I should say is that everything I do is the real me. And so I was really, something about that like really irked me when I was younger. And then even with, I guess, like the Lightspeed to Blood Orange thing, it was more of, it was like being overly aware of connotations and the idea that, like if the first Blood Orange album was called Lightspeed Champion, even less people that listened to it would have listened to it. And it's not something that it's not like I was thinking necessarily about how I want people to listen to it, but going back to what Róisín said, we're choosing to put it out into the world. So obviously some part of me is aware of that. So I was just dancing, trying to avoid the ideas of connotations. But now maybe I'm in a lucky place now, like where I'm aware that maybe people are, they see it and they know that it's just all me. It's all these different parts of me. And even within the Blood Orange albums, a lot of things sound completely different from the other. But that was more, that's kind of where I was coming from with that. And also, I'm a really big fan of bands, and growing up, I kind of live in this like eternal fandom. And in some ways, everything I make is based upon this idea from when I was younger of that fandom and wanting to be in bands or be certain artists, or having posters on my wall and wanting to be that person that I've stuck on my wall, like VHS in Top of the Pops, and wanting to be the person that was like on that stage. And so I can kind of do that now by myself. And so that's kind of a part of that. And I still live that out. I still do that in my music to a certain extent.
Well, I can't resist asking what poster remains in your poster from your wall remains in your mind.
Oh, I mean, they're all still there. Although some of them are a little problematic, so I don't know if I can even really talk about it. But I don't know, like, I mean, I'll say it because it was a fact when I was younger, but like the Smiths, and you know, and I don't know, Cocteau Twins or like Nina Simone or Tupac, you know, it was, or even, I don't know, like Pablo Casals, because the first thing I learned was cello and I was obsessed with Pablo Casals. So there's, it's endless basically. And I love that I can like still live out those fantasies, really.
I think that's an under discussed element of people who study classical music as kids, that you had your like pop star classical, like, I don't know, Andre Segovia when I was playing classical guitar. John, you know, that was Julian Bream was my jam. I could not imagine being Julian Bream, obviously, but that's real. It's not just like rock stars who are rock stars, I guess. But you know, Rostam, I want to say to you, yes, you want to talk. Go ahead, feel free.
I think, well, because I went to school and I studied composition, and at the same time I was obsessed with recording and obsessed with producers and teaching myself how to produce really through trial and error, while at the same time like studying classical music. And at some point towards the end of college, these two things started, you know, combining. And if you know what the Overtone series is, it's this interesting link between classical music and record production and mixing. It's like the orchestra in some ways it's sort of like the original album making, or it's the original two speakers in a room, the original headphones. And if you study orchestration, you start to like make these connections between like what are the frequencies in a snare drum and a kick drum, and what are the frequencies that the cello and the double bass play, and why does it sound good when they double each other. So for me, like, I love producers. I was obsessed with production, and I was studying composition. The 8 years that I was in a band is this anomaly that actually felt kind of unnatural. And a lot of people ask me so many questions about leaving Vampire Weekend, but you know, for the people who knew me, my fellow bandmates, from the beginning, they were kind of like, yeah, he was, we knew that his brain was wired differently. And so it, you know, I felt like for me, like I don't connect at all with what Dev said about idealizing the band. My idol was Nigel Godrich, not so much Radiohead. Although I love Radiohead's music, it wasn't like, it was much more interesting what Nigel Godrich was doing.
Well, you know, one thing I'll say, this might seem like a trivial thing, but your name is perfect because you have that perfect disco producer name. Just like you can be one name, Rostam, like Cerrone. So you were born to be a producer.
Interestingly, though, I will say this. I've never been credited as a producer or a writer with just my first name. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I've never been interested in that. But it doesn't mean anything. But
What about you, Tamara? Because working under the name The Weather Station is, well, it's an interesting choice because the realm that you're often placed into by marketing people and the press, like me, is like more singer-songwriter in some ways, but often associated with like the solo artist, the singer-songwriter moment in the 60s when the singer-songwriters came into vogue. That was the turn from the band to the solo artist, right? It was like Big Brother and the holding company, then suddenly we're with Joni Mitchell, and it's the single, often woman, not always. So why be the weather station?
I mean, it's funny. It's a bit of a holdover from my like youth of like when I first started making music. It was actually like I didn't even write songs. It was like I was just recording sounds and making like soundscapes. Like I was really influenced by this band, The Books. And that was my entry to music. Like it didn't occur to me to like write a song with lyrics, even though I was like a choir kid. So I was like, well, it'd be good if I started singing at some point because that's what I'm comfortable doing. But my first recordings were kind of weird. And honestly, The Weather Station is just the name that I used to put my music on MySpace, dating myself slightly. it was because I wanted to be anonymous. Like I didn't want people to know who I was. And I made up this whole fake story that my music was made by a person living in a weather station in the Arctic. Um, so yeah, and then but then at every interval where I could have like let go of the name and just had a name, like on my second record, which is like super folky singer-songwriter, I felt really uncomfortable having like a female name, because at the time I felt like a woman's name on a CD cover meant something, like it meant a specific thing. It put you in a box.
Interesting.
This is
Yeah.
important. That was literally how I felt. And that has changed now, you know, like with like Phoebe Bridgers and like Lucy Dacus. But to me, like a woman's name means like this isn't artist, you know, this isn't important. You shouldn't listen to this. So I've held on to my moniker. And then even though I have for most of my time actually been writing very personal first person songs, but I think having a moniker is still cool. Like I think it doesn't matter much. And I think of it as this nice thing that I can carry with me, and that I'm glad I didn't choose something more embarrassing. And actually, in a strange way, it's become a part of a statement of purpose for me. And also, you know, I love having a moniker because I feel like I could release an instrumental piano record someday and it would work, you know. And I think it doesn't matter, but at the same time, it's quite nice to have.
I don't know if you're a fan of the movies of Guy Madden, Canadian filmmaker like yourself, also Canadian, but now I will always think of you as like, you know, he often has these very surreal images of people in very isolated, like on a submarine or off in a snowdrift. Now I'll think of you in this weather station. Well, Róisín, you were in a band that became quite well known, of course, and then you shifted to solo artist status. But as you said, you're always collaborating, you're always in partnership. And what Tamara was saying about the kind of baggage of a woman's name is so interesting, because on the one hand, I also think, on the one hand, I could see where that would be, you would feel that way. But on the other hand, I think women in pop, especially, are making mains, whatever that is, club music maybe, but also pop music. There's a kind of pressure to be a solo artist in some ways. But I wondered what you're looking at me like, no, there's not. I don't know. I mean, I would think,
you know, my name, the story of my name is that I would have liked to have been something not Róisín Murphy, even when I was in Moloko. But Moloko was actually a love affair, and I fell into all this. I wasn't sort of like a singer-songwriter at all. And Mark, who I was with for all them years making music, right from the first time I met him, right from the first night I met him, we went into his big studio and had a look at his massive equipment. But I wanted to be a different name because I had a sense that Róisín's very hard to say, and you know, and I think that's true. I think I was right in a sense. I think people won't say something they don't think they're saying right, so your name doesn't go around as much. But he wasn't having that. He loved my name, and he actually thought he dreamt my name before he met me, so he just wouldn't let me let go of my name. And so that was that. But I'm Róisín Murphy for good or for ill. But,
did you have a name that you wanted? What is the? I
did think about maybe just being Murphy, you know, just being Murphy, or Murphy, or Spud Murphy, or something like that. Mickey Murphy's daughter. No, but just something that people, you know, as I said, if you can't say it, you won't say it. You know, it's a bit like speaking different language or something, or when I'm ordering something in Italy and I speak a little bit of Italian, it all goes very quiet because I'm not quite sure about it. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's been a bit of an issue with that for me.
But that also shows up the prejudices and inequities of you know, the music industry, that certain names, and I'm thinking of also African American names now that, you know, supposedly are unpronounceable, or, you know, from many different parts of the world.
Well, definitely Irish names. Lord have mercy there. Oh.
Yes, but maybe it's on our it's on us as listeners, as
But
consumers
that's the
of culture
problem.
to
It's
like
like, it's
learn
on you, it's on you. You get my name right, you know. Nobody wants to hear me told off about that. And nobody wants to be told off about women, and nobody wants to be told off about this, that, or whatever when it comes to art and music and beautiful stuff. You know, people want to relax, enjoy themselves.
That's very true. That is a good point. But at the same time, we can learn. We learn so much through it. But I wanted, when Rostam, when you were talking about Nigel Godrich, that made me think about a photograph I saw the other day. I was writing something about Kate Bush. I was looking at old photos of Kate Bush, and I saw this photo of Kate Bush and Del Palmer, her then boyfriend, partner, who was also her bass player, and they're looking at a fairlight. And they, that meme that's like, you look at your, find a man who looks at you, or a woman who looks at you like blah looks at black. Well, find a person who looks at you like Kate Bush and Del Palmer were looking at this fairlight synthesizer, because they're in love. And I just wondered, particularly for you, but anybody can take this, was there a piece of technology, that changed things for you, that you fell in love with, the way that with Kate on the Dreaming, actually on Never Forever, but then really on the Dreaming, everything changed. The world expanded infinitely once she got that instrument. Did that ever happen with you?
I just want to say that my Wi-Fi network is called Cloudbuster. So you're talking to a true Kate Bush head. And I want to say, like, she's one of the most inspiring producers to me. And of course, because she's an incredible singer and songwriter, that's often, diminished when we talk about her, and it shouldn't be. Your question is about the Fairlight, and
or about, was there an equivalent of that, like that? And really, I was curious for any of you, like a piece of gear that changed things for you, that took you to a new place. And as a producer, I wonder if that ever happened. Like,
I had an interesting experience, because when I was 18, I was able to like hack all these Pro Tools plugins that cost thousands of dollars and I shouldn't have had access to, but I was good on the internet, and I was able to get like auto tune. I was able to get Vocaline, which Vocaline is this really interesting technology that was developed for ADR. It was used so that actors could re-record their vocals or their dialogue after, if the set was loud, they needed a new isolated piece of dialogue, and it had to match the timing exactly. Well, producers found that you could actually take that same technology and apply it to recording vocals. So you could triple track a vocal and then make it have the exact same timing. So there's a few pieces of equipment that I use to this day, like auto-tune, Vocaline. And there's this one reverb that I love called Altiverb, and it's a convolution reverb, and it lets you sample spaces. So
that's really cool. So
yeah,
like you could, like, it'd be like sampling in the inside of a cathedral or in a forest or whatever. Oh, that's so interesting.
And in fact, pretty much the only studio that I use besides my own in LA is a studio that no longer exists. It's called Vox. I don't know if any of you guys ever made it there, but it was an incredible space, and the floors were linoleum. It used to be an Italian restaurant in 1936, and then in 1937 it became a studio, and it stayed a studio until then. But I was actually able to sample that space. So even though the studio doesn't exist, I can achieve the sound of that room if I want to.
Anyone else want to talk about a piece of gear or software, something that changed things for you, that changed your path?
I mean, I'm gonna dive in and say, like, I'm remembering buying a M Audio M-Box audio interface, which costs like $100 or whatever. And, it changed my life forever, because and this is something that's so different about the modern musician, like my first musical experience was buying an interface and renting a microphone. And immediately, like, I had the ability to make recorded music, instantly. And that was so powerful to just play something and hear it back. And that little cheap interface made it all possible.
Well, we've been talking for a while and ranged over many, many different subjects as we think about change and flux, but I feel I would be remiss in not and Róisín, you brought it up a little bit early in our conversation, but not bring up the fact of this past year and how much of a challenge it's been for musicians and everyone who is in this art world, this mutual aid world we have, where we, support each other and getting music out in the world. Not only musicians, but crew members, engineers, lighting people, stylists. So many people have really, had to face so much this year. There have also, I think, been some pathways to innovation through this year that have proven positive. Tamara, you mentioned like the return to thinking about headphones, the return to the intimate experience, maybe the focus on the intimate experience. I think that remote collaboration, I've talked to a lot of musicians who've said, wow, I was able to collaborate with people I never thought I could because we're all just sitting at home and we could collaborate remotely. That's another positive thing. But let's just reflect, as we close on our subject of change, what have you learned this year that feels really good and is taking you forward? Let's start there. Let's not start with the negative. Let's say, what have you learned this year that's good and taking you forward? Anyone? Or we can go right to the negatives.
I mean, it's hard. It's a hard question to answer, but like I feel like for myself, and for a lot of my friends who are musicians, like taking away everything, has forced us inward in a way that, I think there are ways in which it's been negative and there are ways in which it's been positive. And I would say for me, it's really freed me from so many of the things I thought were important. I mean, what Dev was talking about the competition. And, for me, I felt like I have reconnected with my own perspective, and that being the only perspective that, like my own enjoyment, my own joy, my own like intellectual perspective also as being, important, and I felt far less pressure to successfully exist in some kind of ecosystem. And strangely, as I've done that, I've had a better year than I ever have before. And yeah, I feel like we've all, because we've had the physical taken away from us, we've had to communicate with words and ideas. And that to me has been really interesting and transformative if I think of like society as a whole. So yeah.
Any other positives?
I've had a pretty positive experience, and I've had a positive performative experience, like through here, and I've created performances sitting in this living room or in my garden or wherever, and or coming along on a tractor, and I've shown what I think my fans have always known about me, which is that a performer will always perform. Someone who's got something to give will always find a way to give it to you. And that's been massive positive for me. Also, just going back and kind of melding the two questions, the last one about a piece of gear. For me, in the last 2 years, I've started to write songs on Ableton here on my own, and not have to go into a studio, not have to either have an engineer or a producer there. And my songwriting has changed and evolved and developed, and amazing things have happened because of that. And it's a liberating piece of gear, for someone like me who doesn't hasn't ever thought about being the producer or even a musician, So that's been amazing. But yeah, the main thing is this kind of like, regardless as to what's going on, Róisín's going to reach in there and she's going to touch you, because that's what she does. And yeah, so that's been a massive positive.
Anything good? Anything good of this past year? Or was it utter despair?
I got a dog. That was a big a big change for me.
That's a great change.
I feel like it's interesting. Like, it almost feels like this entire pandemic year has been half of a year, and then when it ends, we're gonna get the other half of the year. I don't know if anyone feels that way, but in some ways, I feel like I'm ready for the next half of the year to begin whenever that happens. So it does feel like the year is not over.
Well, Dev, let's give you the last word. If not a positive
Oh,
thing,
no.
how about an insight? An insight, you know, what has changed in your mind over this past year?
It's still, I think it's still a work in progress. I don't know if I'm there yet. Because honestly, I feel like I somewhat lost myself in some ways. And so I'm like recalibrating and recentering and trying to find whatever that is and dig deep into the root. So I think I'm still digging. I don't know what it is, and I don't know when I'll get there. So you know, honestly, that could be seen as a positive or a negative. You can kind of look at it as both. And honestly, I think that happened to everyone in some ways, regardless of situation or if there's an actual thing in regards to the life they're talking about. But I think, you know, we had to, everyone ended up taking a closer look at something. So yeah, I think it's still a process.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. We are in process, we are changing. And I thank you all so much for your valuable insights into music making, into this moment we're living in. And thank you so much for your music. And I know that all of us out there, all of you out there watching this today, you're going to want to seek out music from these artists who really are helping us trace our path through these complicated times. Thank you all. I'm Ann Powers. Bye.